On October 5th, the national budget for fiscal 2021 was presented in Parliament. We kicked off our post-budget analysis this week on the Now Morning Show with a budget overview by Nicole Joseph of PwC, Trinidad and Tobago. Over the past week, we took a look at the budget specifically with regard to agriculture, education, sport, the creative sector, and health. And today we continue the conversation with the CEO of AmCham, Neeraj Tiwari. Good morning, Neeraj.
Hey, good morning, Lisa. Good morning to all your viewers and everyone in studio.
Neeraj, I want to start with a general overview. What is AmCham's view on the budget that was presented by the Honorable Minister of Finance?
We're a little more optimistic with this budget than we had been with previous budgets because we see specific intentions linked to actions that are ongoing to improve the ease of doing business and how citizens and businesses will interact with the state. So things like digitization of the government, the reduction of the time to get permits, and those kinds of things have been very positive for us.
Yeah. So, you mentioned the word optimistic, and that word did jump out at me from the press release that you guys issued earlier. Let's talk a bit about the ease of doing business, specifically with regard to the digitization of the economy. How do you see that rolling out?
Right. So if you'd permit me just a couple of seconds. So all of this is linked to confidence, right? So we've been in almost a decade of decline. Our GDP today, how much we produce in the economy, is roughly equivalent to what we were producing in 2004 in real terms. And so to be able to have a sustainable future, we need people to invest in Trinidad and Tobago so that more jobs could be created and the government could collect more money. And, whether it is investments in the upstream to get more gas and oil as part of that strategy, but I think we all recognize by now that that can't be the only type of investment that we need in the economy. And what has happened is the liquidity in the banking system, meaning the amount of money that people are just parking up and really not using for any productive purposes, has been increasing in this COVID period, believe it or not. So it's gone to $12 billion, almost 13, whereas in January of this year it was around 4, according to the central bank. And you need confidence in the system to inspire people to take their resources and invest it and take that risk, right? Whether it is borrowing money to invest or whether it's using money that they have to invest and do something with it. So the digitization of the government, to your question, is part of what has happened concurrently is that the ease of doing business, or how easy it is to get things done and transact business generally, has been falling. So it's been getting harder to do business in Trinidad and Tobago. And that's because processes are not clear, there's too much discretion, you have to go into this office and that office and so on. So if you digitize government services, so even if you can pay your taxes in the same way you would pay a bill online.
Yeah.
If you could pay for already, you can just write and apply online and get your birth certificate. If we can do that for passports, if we can do that for driver's license renewals, if we can do that for all of the services that you need, or not all, but the majority of the services that you need from the state, it makes life a lot easier. And I think that people are getting it. I myself, I'm trying to do a small matter, and the public servants and the people in the state enterprise sector with whom I have to deal right now are accepting electronic documents. They're saying, okay, fine, scan it and send it in and we'll use that.
Well, I think some of that was driven by the pandemic as well. The digitization was on the table, but it certainly it received a fillip with the pandemic and the fact that people had to resort to doing things more online.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a joke in the private sector, right? Who did more for your digital transformation of your company? Your CEO, your CTO, your CIO, Chief Information Officer, or COVID-19? And the
Yeah.
answer is always COVID-19.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And but Nirad, certainly there are other aspects in the economy besides digitization that would uh, impact the ease of doing business.
Certainly. So customs, but they're linked. It all comes back to a level of digitization, right? So
Mm-hmm.
what if you implement the digital transformation of the government properly, what it does is it provides systems that are more difficult to corrupt and more difficult to allow for discretion that would cause problem. Now, all of this is going to be run. All of these systems are going to be run by people, and therefore, you have to move the people in the positions along with the digitization. But for example, if we are modernizing customs, and we are, and I think there's a level of commitment in customs to do things differently.
Yeah.
Um, and hopefully we'll start to see that rolling out. They're supposed to be going to a new version of the ASICUDA system, which is the online system where you input all of your information when you're bringing something in. If you're a cargo reporter, so if you're an express logistics company or freight forwarder and so on, and if the system works well, the the security services, customs, and others will be pulling information from various sources to be able to identify levels of risk so that when the goods get to the border, they can say, you know what, we don't need to check everything. And of course, this will be underpinned by scanners, hopefully, at all of the ports and so on, including the airport. But they would have a level of risk assessment done in advance, which should facilitate trade and allow the government to collect its revenue and protect the borders in a more efficient manner. So the permitting system. So one of the things we can do is look at the ease of doing business, the World Economic Forum ease of doing business ranking,
Yeah.
and see where we score badly. And one of the things we score badly on is the length of time it takes to get permits. So
Yeah.
the government has started a pilot around planning permissions online, and they said that they intend to roll it out. But the Minister of Finance spoke specifically to reducing the length of time it takes to get permits in Trinidad and Tobago. The virtual courts. Another thing, another area where we rank very badly is the length of time that it takes to settle legal disputes. Trinidad and Tobago is in a unique position where we're sort of in a paradox where we have a strong adherence to the protection of rights for investors. So we don't, like Venezuela, go and take people's assets and
Yeah.
just say that's now the government or whatever. But when we have a dispute, either between a business and the government or between two businesses, the length of time it takes for that dispute to get settled and therefore resolution and possibly payment is inordinately long, and compared to the rest of the world, we don't rank well. So if we can address that, it will improve our ease of doing business as well.
Mm-hmm.
And all of these things inspire confidence and allow people or encourage people to invest and create jobs and pay taxes and so on.
Well, let's switch gears a little bit, Nirad. In the aftermath of the lockdown, as a result of this ongoing pandemic, so although we are out of the lockdown technically, the pandemic continues. The government speaks of resetting the economy for growth and innovation and the involvement of the public and private sector partnerships that will help to relieve funding constraints, yeah? So what are some of these growth and innovation areas from where you sit, where you see the opportunities?
Well, I mean, so the liberalization of the fuel sector, we think is a good thing, but we do think that there needs to be um, effective regulation to allow for anti-competitive or monopolistic behavior, right? So you
Mm-hmm.
don't want one company owning or two companies owning
All of, yeah.
90% of the gas stations, and therefore being able to effectively set prices amongst themselves or between them.
Yeah.
But allowing the private sector to do what the private sector does and taking that away from the inefficiencies of the state. So we support the privatization of the port. Now, when you talk about privatization of the port, right, it does not mean that there will be no jobs, you know. It just means that the state won't be managing those jobs. But in theory, if it works well, there'll be more jobs because the port will be able to handle more cargo, and the economy would be doing better because efficiency, ease of doing business is improving, and there's more economic activity. And who are you going to hire if you have jobs on the port? Not people who are experienced once they're willing to work and willing to work honestly. I mean, so those kinds of things we see as positive. We see the incentives around the junior stock exchange as a positive step, and there was just a little bit of talk about private equity.
Yes.
It was well developed, but we need more private equity. I mean, when we talk about the creative sector in particular, we need we need non-traditional sources of financing, right? So for the economy to really flourish, we need to understand that there are some pieces of the puzzle that are missing and work on incentivizing the development of those pieces to help the overall puzzle fill out. Meaning, in this case, that we have a very strong banking system, and I know the banks get knocked. I'm not here to defend the banks or not, but what I
Let's
would
not go in
say
that
is,
direction at all, Nirad.
pardon me?
Don't even start on that, Nirad.
No, but I would say this. I would say that the banks play a particular role in the economy, right? And
Yeah.
we can discuss whether that role should be extended. But I don't want the banks where I store, well, where I go for my home mortgage and my car loan and so on, to be in a position where they might close down next quarter because they've undertaken a series of risky investments. I want
Yeah.
stability in the banking sector.
Yeah, which is why you're thinking investment in non-traditional areas, which, for example, the creative sector falls. You want non-traditional sources of finance for that, yeah?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
I think the banks could do a little more with intangible assets.
Yeah. But I
such
think
as catalogs and the like.
Yeah.
But I think that we do need other sources of financing and other financial structures to develop in the market. And there's some
Yeah.
sort of private equity companies and so on.
Because we
But
definitely
we need to develop that even more.
because we definitely need to look at alternative sources of income, yeah, besides taxation and oil revenues being the main drivers of the economy, yeah. Nirad, you know, we're out of time. That's all the time we have for today. We can chat for hours because I know that you are at the top of all of this. But I want to thank you so much for joining us this morning just to shed some light with regard to the budget and where, from the perspective of AmCham. Continue to be safe, Nirad.
Thank you. It was my pleasure. Thanks very much for having me, Lisa. It's always great to chat with you.
You likewise. That was Nirad Tiwari, CEO of the American Chamber of Commerce, weighing in on the national budget, which was presented in Parliament on October 5th.